Hey friends, tonight we begin with a subject both unspeakable and surprisingly sophisticated. The deeply human, often humiliating, and occasionally ingenious world of ancient bathroom life. Picture this, you're in Rome. Not imperial, not grand, just Roman. You walk into a public building, sit down on a cold stone bench, and prepare to relieve yourself shoulder to shoulder with a dozen strangers doing exactly the same thing. There are no walls, no doors, but there is a sponge on a stick, and it's communal. That's right, one sponge. Many people, rinsed in vinegar water, passed hand to hand like a sacred soggy torch. It wasn't just accepted, it was normal, Roman even. Because in the ancient world, privacy was a luxury, but plumbing was politics. So, before we slip quietly into this less than dignified corner of human history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy these dimly lit journeys into things we don't usually talk about but probably should. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and whether you're horizontal yet. It's always oddly comforting to see who's drifting off with me from halfway across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's ease into tonight's descent into chamber pots, stone benches, royal thrones with holes, and everything else that came before the blessed flush. If you had to go to the bathroom in ancient Rome, and sooner or later you did, you didn't sneak off somewhere quiet, private, and softly lit. You didn't lock a door, you didn't turn on a fan, you didn't even pretend you weren't doing what you were doing. You just went, alongside everyone else, in a long row, on a shared bench, in the open air. And that was perfectly normal. Roman latrines were public, communal, and alarmingly social. Long stone benches with holes carved in them like a game of uncomfortable musical chairs, usually 20 or more in a row. No partitions, no doors, just people, sitting side by side, knees aligned, eyes forward, and talking. Because of course they talked. You didn't go to the latrine for solitude, you went for company, for politics, for poetry, for updates on the grain supply, the latest local scandal, or what that guy from the bathhouse said about your cousin's cousin. You might call it multitasking. They called it Tuesday. Now, let's not pretend it was luxurious. The stone was cold, the smell was generous, and there was no flushing. But there was flow. Beneath the benches ran a continuous stream of water, channeled by some of the finest engineering the empire could offer. It carried everything: waste, runoff, conversation starters out toward the great sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. It was a marvel, and also, occasionally, a disaster. But we'll get to that. Let's begin with the logistics. You'd walk into the latrine, sometimes built near a forum or bathhouse, sometimes just tucked behind a temple. You'd lift your tunic, sit down, and hope the person next to you was more interested in gossip than eye contact. Beneath you, a hole. Below that, a shallow sewage channel. In front of you, a narrow trench of water. That's where you'd find the sponge. Yes, the sponge. The Roman solution to toilet paper was not paper. It was a sea sponge, mounted on a short stick, resting in that little water trench between everyone's feet. After you finished your business, you dip the sponge, wipe as needed, rinse, and return it. For the next person, communal wiping wasn't optional, it was expected. Some sponges may have been shared, others personal. Historians disagree. But given Roman enthusiasm for practicality and lack of shame, it's not hard to guess. There is no recorded term for my own private sponge. Now, if you're recoiling, understandable. But Romans were surprisingly confident in their methods. The water ran with vinegar or salt to keep it clean. The sponge was natural, reusable, biodegradable, and significantly cheaper than anything else. And most importantly, it worked. Sort of. And if you needed help, there were attendants, slaves usually, tasked with keeping the water flowing, the trench unclogged, and the sponge distribution semi-civilized. It wasn't glamorous, but it was Rome. And Rome loved systems, which brings us to the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. Built in the 6th century BCE, expanded over centuries, it carried the waste of 1 million lives out of the city and into the Tiber River. It was gravity-fed, surprisingly effective, and occasionally treacherous. It collapsed sometimes, it flooded, it backed up, but mostly it worked, which is more than can be said for most medieval plumbing that came 1,000 years later. But not all dangers were structural. Romans, for all their stoicism, believed latrines were spiritually risky. They were dark, damp, and unpredictable, places where demons lurked, ghosts, curses, rats. There are stories, half myth, half memory, of creatures rising from the sewage, biting the exposed, and disappearing before blame could be assigned. Snakes, weasels, spirits. No one was quite sure which was worse. To protect themselves, Romans prayed. They built tiny shrines near toilet areas, offered words to Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer. She ruled purification, modesty, and not coincidentally safe bowel movements. She was highly respected, and hopefully not too observant. Still, physical threats remained. Methane gas, for example. Enclosed latrines without proper airflow could become deadly. One torch, one unlucky spark, and you had a very public, very awkward explosion. There's at least one recorded case of a latrine catching fire, another of a man falling into the sewer and not re-emerging, which makes the sponge issue feel like a minor inconvenience. But for all this, public latrines weren't for the poor alone. Wealthy Romans used them too on the road, in the market, during visits. They had private toilets in their villas, of course, simple ones, ceramic basins, drainage pipes, occasionally even indoor plumbing. But in the city, if nature called, you answered, wherever you happened to be. And you answered it together. Wealthy or not, there was something leveling about sitting on the same bench with your neighbours, your rivals, your senator, your fishmonger. Legs dangling, sponge soaking, life paused. And that was part of the point. The Roman latrine was more than just efficient. It was communal, civic, a place where the body's needs were acknowledged, managed, and even shared. It was a space of democracy, of routine, of relief, and also, sometimes, of graffiti, because of course there was graffiti. Walls scrawled with crude drawings, names, insults, jokes. Things like, I came, I saw, I conquered, the bench. Or, Secundus did a number 2 here. Or less appropriate verses about local officials and their questionable hygiene. Some were poetic, others were anatomical. All were deeply human. Because when you strip away the togas, the statues, the Latin inscriptions, and the marble, Romans were people. They had stomach aches, bad days, too much lentil stew. They needed to go. And when they did, they went with company. Now, women? Yes, Roman women did use latrines. But access was more restricted. Some latrines were mixed use. Others designated separate areas. Privacy, again, was minimal. Many women preferred chamber pots at home, or timed their needs carefully, or just endured. Wealthier women often had servants to assist, to hold up fabric, to fetch water, to pour perfume after. Privacy wasn't the goal. Dignity in the middle of indignity, that was the art form. Children learned early, not potty-trained so much as publicly initiated. You watched, you copied, you learned not to fall in. And then there were the chamber pots, used at night, in bedrooms, in hallways, in corners, emptied in the morning by whoever drew the short straw. If you lived in a tall insula, a Roman apartment building, you might pour it out the window, with a quick warning, or not. The city had rules. Don't throw things into the street, said the law. But human nature doesn't always respect signage. Which brings us back to the latrine. Because as strange as it seems to us now, this cold bench, this shared sponge, this public ritual, Romans weren't embarrassed. They were proud. They had figured it out. Waste was managed, water flowed, streets were cleaner than in many cities that came centuries later. Their system was advanced, reliable, and impressively gross. And that's the beauty of it. The Roman toilet wasn't about shame, it was about function, community, infrastructure, and a remarkable ability to face the realities of the body with a straight face and a sponge in hand. So the next time you retreat to your bathroom with soft lighting and scented candles, remember the people who came before you, who sat side by side, who wiped with sea creatures, who prayed to sewer gods and told fart jokes in Latin, because sometimes civilization is measured not by its art, its armies, or its aqueducts, but by how well it deals with what happens after dinner. And Rome? Rome did just fine. If Roman toilets were proud, public, and thoughtfully engineered, medieval castle toilets were, well, higher up and significantly riskier. The technical term was the garderobe, but don't let the French fool you. It wasn't a wardrobe. It was a hole that emptied into the moat, or onto the ground, or down the side of a stone wall like some unfortunate architectural afterthought. Medieval castles weren't exactly designed with plumbing in mind. They were built for defense, fortification, impressing your rivals, deterring your neighbors, and occasionally housing a minor noble with a fondness for boiled meat. Toilets were more of a late-stage consideration. So the garderobe was born a stone seat jutting out from the wall, usually located in a narrow, closet-like chamber. It had a wooden lid, maybe, and a chute beneath. You sat, you dropped. Gravity did the rest. Down, 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 into whatever awaited below. In some cases, it was a cesspit. In others, the castle's moat, which, contrary to romantic illustrations, was less a shimmering body of water and more a stagnant, greenish soup of rainwater, waste, and the occasional duck with regrets. Castles didn't flush, they oozed. And this wasn't rare. Nearly every medieval fortress in Europe had some version of the chute toilet. The fancier ones had double garderobes. The most advanced had angled shafts, so the waste landed a little farther from the walls. A small kindness. But the smell? Unavoidable. Even in stone, even in winter, especially in summer. There are records multiple of castle guests complaining about the stench wafting up from the garderobe, through the halls, into the kitchens, past the tapestries, and directly into whatever unfortunate nose was nearby. To be clear, castle life was already ripe with aromas. Open hearths, damp wool, salted meat, unwashed tunics. But the toilet smell? That had a personality. It lingered. It clung. It made statements. That said, there was a strange upside. Because the garderobe chute exited outside the castle walls, it created a small but vulnerable opening in the stone defences, which meant one thing: enemies could crawl in. So castle designers got clever. Some garderobes were placed directly above murder holes. Others had false chutes to lure and trap invaders. Some even had iron grates at the bottom, not to keep things in, but to keep things out. Imagine being the knight assigned to check the grate. Now, not all toilets were built equal. The king's garderobe might have a padded seat, perhaps even a decorative curtain. Some had small windows, for light. Others had carved vents, for the illusion of ventilation. A few were tucked into towers with a long drop, so long that winter frost turned the shaft into something medieval plumbers referred to as a problem. There are even stories of garderobes freezing solid, of people falling in, of enemies poisoning the pit to kill whoever used it next. Toilet warfare, the lesser-known battlefield. But let's talk daily life. Most nobles had personal garderobes attached to their chambers. The really powerful ones had multi-level toilets, a vertical stack of seats, each feeding into the same shaft. It looked efficient on parchment. In practice, less so, because if someone on the second floor didn't time things properly, the person below might get a surprise, and not the kind you can write off as just weather. Peasants, of course, had no castles, no garderobes. Many used cesspits, dug into the ground and emptied occasionally. Others used chamber pots, thrown out windows with a quick shout of "Gardez l'eau," asterisk French for "watch out for the water," though water was a generous term. In towns, narrow alleys ran with waste. Drainage was theoretical. Laws were passed banning pot emptying during daylight hours. No one obeyed them. The smell of the city was part of the city. And the toilets, or lack thereof, shaped behavior. People walked carefully, stuck to the middle of the street, wore long cloaks, tilted their hats. It was less fashion, more survival. Bathing? Rare. Soap? Expensive. Toilet paper? Fantasy. Some used moss. Others used rags. In winter, snowballs. In desperation, a particularly unlucky chicken feather. But in the castle, at least, you had a seat, a view, and if you were lucky, a long drop. Still, it wasn't exactly private. Castle walls echoed, servants wandered, guards stood nearby. You might be high up, but you weren't alone, and the sound of things landing in the moat was hard to ignore. Some garderobes were even shared, side by side, like a medieval two-stall experience, without the wall or the dignity. And yet, this was considered an upgrade, because for centuries, many people simply went where they could, behind barns, in corners, in fields, or not at all. Holding it became a skill, discretion, a virtue, which makes the garderobe stench, risk, and all a strange symbol of progress. And castles didn't stop there. Some had dedicated waste rooms, chutes for kitchen refuse, slopes for rainwater, grooves carved into stone to direct the flow. Medieval engineers knew their fluids, just not how to keep them entirely separate. As for cleaning, the pits had to be emptied, occasionally, by someone. Gong farmers, they were called in England, men who cleaned cesspits, night soil, and everything in between, paid well, avoided often, and probably the only people less popular than tax collectors. Gong farmers worked at night, with long-handled buckets. They descended into the pit, scraped, shoveled, and hauled. It was dangerous. The fumes could kill, the walls could collapse, and the pay? Barely enough. But someone had to do it, or else the pit overflowed, and when it did, it didn't ask permission. There's at least one recorded case of a castle privy collapsing during use. A German king, no less, swept into the cesspit with several of his knights. None survived. A royal flush of the most tragic variety. So what does all this mean? That medieval toileting was risky, loud, and rarely alone. That even in stone fortresses, surrounded by walls and wealth and knights in armor, people still had to find a way to do the most basic human thing. And they did it with ingenuity, with complaints, with architectural compromises, with curtains and courage and occasionally a prayer to St. Jude. Because when you live in a world without plumbing, the simple act of sitting down becomes an adventure. So the next time you're on a porcelain throne, flush handle within reach, air freshener nearby, remember the castle dwellers, the ones who perched over moats, who braved the wind, who hoped no one was climbing up from below, and say a quiet thanks for your walls, for your floor, and for the absence of ducks. If the medieval garderobe was the grand performance of toileting, then the chamber pot was the quiet understudy, modest, ubiquitous, and hiding just beneath the bed. Because no matter how noble, no matter how heavily armoured your castle walls were, one thing remained true. Nobody wanted to walk to the toilet in the middle of the night, especially not in winter, especially not while half asleep, especially not while trying to avoid stepping on a cat, a cold flagstone, or your cousin who was snoring on the floor. So the chamber pot became standard issue. It was exactly what it sounds like, a pot, in the chamber, made of ceramic or metal, sometimes wood, sometimes glazed, sometimes not, used at night, emptied in the morning. Hopefully, the rules were simple. If you woke up and needed to go, you grabbed the pot, did your business, and placed it neatly back in its corner, or under the bed, or wherever your feet wouldn't knock it over. Unless, of course, you were a noble, in which case someone else handled that part. Enter the chambermaid. Her duties included lighting the fire, fetching water, folding linens, and yes, emptying the pot, carrying it discreetly through corridors, down stone steps, past servants, soldiers, guests, and the occasional curious goose, because medieval castles were not quiet, nor were they particularly private. A typical noble's bedroom might include family members, visiting relatives, squires, pets, and the aforementioned staff. Beds were big, yes, but not for luxury. They were big because multiple people often shared them, sometimes for warmth, sometimes for status, sometimes because there were no extra rooms, and chamber pots were necessary, because navigating the castle in the dark wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Stone staircases, open flames, slippery floors, and those moats we mentioned, they didn't always stay outside, so people stayed put, relieved themselves, and went back to sleep. But the pot didn't empty itself. Each morning, servants gathered the pots from every room. Some were discreetly covered, others were not. And the smell? Let's just say it arrived before they did. The contents were poured into cesspits, or down special drains, or, depending on the mood and the local regulations, out the window, which is why walking near castle walls was best done with a hat, or at a distance. There are accounts many, actually, of guests complaining about being splashed, of streets reeking, of balconies doubling as lavatories. Some cities even passed laws dictating when and how one could dispose of a chamber pot. One rule from 14th century London required the caller to shout 3 times before dumping, "Watch out below." Wasn't just a courtesy, it was a survival strategy. Now, the pot itself came in many styles, some plain, some painted, a few even inscribed with messages, for reasons that surely made sense at the time. One surviving example has the phrase, "Use me well and keep me clean, and I won't tell what I have seen." Cheeky and slightly threatening. But for all their ubiquity, chamber pots were still seen as less than polite. A noble wouldn't discuss theirs, a guest wouldn't admire one. They were kept tucked away, under linen, beneath the bed, like secrets made of porcelain. Still, for servants, they were inescapable. A chambermaid might handle dozens per day, and she wasn't always thanked. Some households treated her work as invisible. Others considered it part of her virtue if she could handle human waste without complaint. Surely she could be trusted with anything. And while chamber pots were common in castles, they were just as important in towns. Peasant homes, with dirt floors and low ceilings, often relied on pots too, or outhouses, or the edge of the field, depends on the weather, and the neighbours. Privacy was rare, etiquette was flexible. In one 15th century record, a family of 5 shared a single-room home, a chamber pot, and an understanding that if it was in use, you simply turned away and talked louder. And that's how it was. No scented candles, no flush handle, no "please close the door," just a pot, a lid, and the hope that the dog wouldn't knock it over. But despite their humble function, chamber pots occasionally rose to symbolic status. In some regions, they were wedding gifts, a gesture of domestic practicality. "May your marriage be full and your pot empty," as one well-meaning aunt once said. Probably. They also became ceremonial. In France, the pot de chambre was involved in a bizarre wedding tradition where, after the wedding night, the couple was expected to present their chamber pot, sometimes to prove consummation, sometimes to show evidence. We'll leave it there. In Scotland, the blackening ritual involved chamber pots full of messier substances dumped ceremonially on the groom. Again, probably made sense in context, and in a few unfortunate cases, chamber pots were weapons. There are records of pots being hurled during arguments, sieges, and one particularly nasty family dinner. Let's just say ceramic shards and fermented contents don't mix well with fine linen, but they were part of life. Quietly, nightly, inevitably, they were stored beneath royal canopies and beside peasant fires, carried down castle steps, scrubbed, rinsed, reused, whispered about, rarely mentioned, absolutely essential. And like so many tools of the past, they tell a story, not of glory or conquest, but of human need, of clever solutions, of the daily, messy, unspoken realities that made up 99% of medieval life. Because history isn't just cathedrals and coronations. Sometimes it's a pot in a room, and someone very tired trying not to spill it in the dark. So tonight, as you flush your toilet and never think about it again, give a little nod to the chamber pot, to the chambermaid, to the countless unthanked hands that made sure things stayed just clean enough. Because behind every great noble was someone holding a bucket. If medieval Europe treated toilet time like an unfortunate necessity, ancient Egypt came dangerously close to making it spiritual. The Egyptians, it seems, had a thing for cleanliness. Not modern cleanliness, not lemon-scented disinfectant cleanliness, but ritual purity, a sacred sense that the body should be orderly, inside and out, and yes, that included the back end. Egyptians bathed daily. They shaved their heads to prevent lice. They wore linen for its cleanliness. And when nature called, they had systems. Crude, yes, but thoughtful. Let's begin with the basics. The average home mud brick, single-story, flat roof had a toilet area tucked into a back corner. Not quite a room, more like a small space, separated by a low wall, where a pottery seat sat atop a pit. Yes, a toilet seat. In 1500 BCE, it was a U-shaped slab of baked clay, with a hole in the middle. Beneath it, a container clay jar, basket, or simple pit. You sat, you did your thing, and someone emptied it later. Who? Usually a servant. Or, if you were poor, you did it yourself. But it wasn't just physical waste they worried about. The act itself had meaning. Priests in ancient Egypt were expected to be especially clean. Before entering temples, they bathed, they shaved, and they evacuated. On purpose. They believed the body needed to be fully emptied before approaching the gods. Spiritually light, nothing left unfinished. One 19th dynasty inscription even references a priest cleansing his hands, his mouth, and his innards before ceremony. It gives new meaning to the term holy crap. Now, public toilets? Not exactly. Most defecation was private or at least domestic. But in work camps, like those at Deir el-Medina, where artisans built royal tombs, evidence suggests shared latrines. Small buildings, clay seats, carefully dug pits, not luxurious, but functional. And in towns, archaeologists have found drainage channels running under houses. Simple ones, yes, but far better than what would come later in much of the world. Of course, not everything was perfect. Toilets weren't always ventilated. The desert heat could cook up a stench that lingered like a curse. And emptying the pits? That was a job few wanted, especially when crocodiles waited downstream. Because, yes, crocodiles. Waste was often disposed of in canals, and the Nile, magnificent as it was, had a habit of collecting everything: water, bodies, refuse, and yes, large reptiles with teeth. So while the bathroom might be in your house, the disposal meant a trip outside, a dangerous one. Still, the Egyptians persisted. Because sanitation mattered, they brushed their teeth with powdered stone, they shaved their armpits with bronze razors, they scented their bodies with oils made from frankincense and myrrh, and they wiped with linen or straw, or hands, washed thoroughly. Soap, sort of, a mixture of ash, clay, and animal fat, more abrasive than bubbly, but effective. And for the truly pious, toilet time came with prayers, to the goddess Mut, sometimes, or to Bees, the dwarf god of protection who watched over birth, sleep, and apparently the occasional bowel movement. Images of Bees were carved into walls. Amulets, even toilets. No one wanted demons in the drain. Which brings us to a curious detail. Amulets buried beneath latrines. Why? Protection, perhaps, or superstition. Some believed evil could enter the body during moments of vulnerability, and few things are more vulnerable than squatting over a hole in the ground with your pants around your ankles. Ahem. Let's talk royal toilets. Pharaohs, for all their power, still had to go. But they didn't line up with the labourers. Their facilities were finer ceramic basins, private chambers, sometimes gold-trimmed seats, and always a servant on standby. One to hold incense, another to fan, and one very unlucky soul with a jar and a long walk. There's even debate over whether royal waste was collected separately for ritual disposal. Pharaohs were divine, after all. Their excrement might have been considered dangerous or blessed. We may never know, but we do know this. Ancient Egyptian tombs contain models of toilets, tiny wooden replicas placed in burial chambers, complete with little seated figures. Why? So the dead could continue their routines in the afterlife. Yes, they packed a potty for eternity. That's dedication. And while these models are small, they reveal much: a respect for function, a recognition of the body's needs, a quiet acknowledgement that no matter how grand your temple, you still need somewhere to sit. So what do we learn from the banks of the Nile? That sanitation isn't modern. That privacy is relative. That even in a world of gods, pyramids, and hieroglyphs, someone had to scrub the pot. And maybe, just maybe, that being human has always meant juggling dignity with digestion. So tonight, as you brush your teeth, run water, and close the door behind you, spare a thought for the people who lit incense, whispered prayers, and hoped the crocodile was in a good mood. Because some flushes were more spiritual than others. When you think of ancient China, you might picture silk robes flowing through palace courtyards, the clack of calligraphy brushes on scrolls, and the gentle trickle of water in a moonlit garden. You probably don't think of toilets. But perhaps you should, because while emperors pondered the Tao, poets wrote about the moon, and alchemists chased immortality, everyone still had to go. And China, in its quiet, structured, deeply philosophical way, developed toilet practices that were surprisingly advanced and occasionally a little shocking. Let's start with the basics. The average household in ancient China, particularly during the Han and Tang dynasties, relied on simple pit latrines. A hole in the ground, covered by wooden boards or a ceramic platform, often located in the courtyard or garden, sometimes surrounded by screens, sometimes not. If you were lucky, the pit had a small seat. If not, you hovered. And if it was summer, well, let's just say hovering became an endurance sport. But even early on, Chinese cities took waste seriously. In urban areas, there were public latrines, paid attendants, stone steps, and systems for collecting and emptying the waste. Human waste, known euphemistically as night soil, wasn't just refuse. It was a resource. Yes, a resource. China was, and remains, an agricultural powerhouse. And centuries ago, long before the flush toilet, human waste was regularly collected, stored, and used as fertilizer. It was practical, efficient, and very, very smelly. Farmers made deals with city workers. Night soil was gathered at dawn, carried in barrels, and sold by the load. Entire industries formed around it. There were rules, there were taxes, there were specialists, men with strong backs and very forgiving noses. So in a strange way, your daily bowel movement helped grow your future dinner. A closed loop, if you will. Now, let's talk royal business. The emperor's toilet was, predictably, nicer. In some dynasties, the palace latrines were tiled, elevated, even heated. Waste dropped into large ceramic jars, which were emptied discreetly. And for wiping? Not paper. Not yet. But cloth? Sometimes. Stick with cloth? Maybe. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because China, believe it or not, is credited with one of the most revolutionary bathroom innovations in history: toilet paper. Yes, really. Long before Charmin, before quilted softness, before two-ply debates, Chinese officials were experimenting with paper for personal hygiene. By the 6th century CE, scholars in the Sui dynasty were writing about the use of soft paper for wiping. In the Tang dynasty, poet official Yan Jitui even noted that one should not use paper containing sacred texts for toilet purposes. Good to know. And by the 14th century, during the Ming dynasty, records show that the imperial court commissioned hundreds of thousands of sheets of toilet paper, special batches, large, perfumed, some even stamped with the emperor's seal. Yes, branded toilet paper, though one imagines the seal was more symbolic than reusable. Outside the palace, paper use trickled down, slowly. For most people, wiping still meant cloth rags, bamboo spatulas, or brace yourself smooth ceramic shards known as liang. Polished, reusable, chilly, not a spa day. But the Chinese approach to cleanliness extended beyond wiping. There were foot baths, hand-washing rituals, and in wealthier homes, a servant might offer fragrant herbs or oils post-visit, not for sanitation exactly, but for dignity, because shame wasn't always part of the equation. In Taoist texts, the body is a system, waste is natural. To be balanced, one must accept the full cycle, ingestion and elimination. Holding it in was considered unhealthy. Letting go? Therapeutic. There's even a proverb, better to lose face than to hold waste. Perhaps that sounds better in Mandarin. Still, privacy was valued. Wealthier households had enclosed toilets, small pavilions in gardens, secluded stalls with screens or curtains, sometimes facing north for feng shui reasons, sometimes facing south for wind reasons, but always somewhere off to the side, because harmony included olfactory balance. Let's pause on the term porcelain throne. We use it jokingly now, but China literally invented porcelain. And while early toilets were made of wood or clay, there are surviving examples of glazed ceramic commodes, shaped, curved, and dare we say almost elegant. In tombs of nobility, archaeologists have uncovered elaborate toilet seats, complete with drainage channels. Some even had a small water basin nearby. It wasn't indoor plumbing, but it was close. In fact, some tombs contain chamber pots and toilet models, not because the dead needed to go, but because the living couldn't imagine eternity without a decent place to relieve oneself. It's strangely comforting. Meanwhile, the cities continued to grow. As urban populations exploded during the Song dynasty, latrine placement became a civic issue. Municipal records from Hangzhou show designated waste collectors, city sanitation laws, and fines for improper dumping. There were efforts to separate human waste from food markets, though with mixed success. Some stalls sold vegetables next to the latrines, a lesson in resilience or bad planning. Still, the system worked. and it fed the empire, literally, which brings us back to the pit. Because whether you lived in a townhouse in Chang'an or a farmhouse in Sichuan, chances are you had a wooden bench, a clay pot, and a very good sense of smell. You timed your visits. You avoided going barefoot. You kept a rag nearby, and you prayed your neighbor didn't empty their bucket upwind. It wasn't glamorous, but it was efficient, and through it all dynasties rose and fell. Inventions came and went, the toilet remained. Silent, waiting, smelling faintly of herbs and fermented rice. A constant reminder that no matter how refined your culture, how exquisite your brushstrokes, or how poetic your thoughts, digestion always wins. So the next time you wipe with a soft, scented square of paper, remember, China did it first. And they did it with balance. In ancient India, where sages meditated beneath banyan trees and kings built marble temples to eternity, even the most mundane acts like using the toilet were woven into a greater spiritual fabric. Because for a civilization that believed life was cyclical, death was temporary, and karma was real, waste wasn't just waste. It was residue of the body, yes, but also a reflection of your relationship with the universe. So naturally, toilets mattered. Not the kind with porcelain seats and chrome handles, but something older, simpler, philosophical, and, in many cases, surprisingly ahead of its time. Let's begin with the Indus Valley civilization. 5,000 years ago, in cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, ancient engineers laid out some of the earliest known urban sanitation systems in the world. Grid-like streets, covered drains, homes equipped with what archaeologists believe were private bathing areas, and get this, toilets that connected to brick-lined sewers. Yes, in 2500 BCE, each house had a small room with a sloped floor, a pit or ceramic pan, and a chute that led to a shared drainage system. Water, often from wells or rain, flushed waste away. Not exactly a modern flush, but definitely intentional plumbing. And unlike many later societies, waste wasn't just dumped outside. It was directed, contained, hidden, handled. It was considered. Fast forward a few centuries, and things got even more layered. In the Vedic age, as religious texts and social systems emerged, ideas around purity became central. Touching excrement, even accidentally, was considered ritually polluting. So was the act of relieving oneself in the wrong place, at the wrong time, or facing the wrong direction. Yes, direction mattered. One rule suggested defecating while facing south, to avoid offending the rising sun. Another banned relieving oneself within 100 paces of water, a temple, or a sacred tree, which, in a forested country full of rivers and shrines, was more complicated than it sounds. Still, the intention was clear: relieve the body, not disturb the cosmos. This led to a peculiar blend of science, etiquette, and cosmic respect. Toilets, when they existed, were placed far from living spaces. In wealthier homes, they were simple brick enclosures, away from the main structure. In rural areas, open-air spots were chosen carefully, used ritualistically, and sometimes marked with stones or flags. Wiping? The left hand. Always. Water was the primary cleanser. A small clay lota, or jug, accompanied most visits. It held water for washing, not drinking, and its placement, shape, and even storage were matters of tradition. To this day, the lota endures. And before you wrinkle your nose, let's consider water cleans, paper smears, and 4,000 years of cultural continuity might just know something we don't. But the rituals didn't end there. After defecating, one was expected to wash thoroughly, change clothes, and not touch anyone until cleansed. Food preparation? Forbidden. Entering the prayer room? Also no. One had to be ritually clean, spiritually neutral, ready to re-enter the social and divine world. This applied to everyone from beggars to Brahmins, though, naturally, caste distinctions complicated things. Lower castes were often assigned the work of cleaning latrines, carrying night soil, and sweeping communal spaces. They were deemed untouchable in the social sense, not because of morality, but because of proximity to impurity. It's a painful legacy, one still echoing today. But let's return to ancient times. Palaces and temples often had sophisticated drainage systems. Temple complexes, especially in the south, were designed with water flow in mind. Wastewater, rainwater, and even toilet runoff were channeled through underground stonework. Some temples had toilet rooms for priests, placed discreetly but effectively, because even the most disciplined monk eventually has to excuse himself. And yet, despite all this infrastructure, discretion remained paramount. You didn't talk about toilets. You didn't brag about plumbing. You relieved yourself quietly, far from the group, and you re-entered society only after making peace with both your body and the spiritual rules you may have jostled. Still, there were exceptions. Ancient texts contain humorous verses about flatulence, digestion, and the unfortunate results of bad lentils. One Sanskrit riddle asks, "What sings, dances, and leaves without a trace?" The answer, loosely translated, is a well-timed fart. Apparently, even in deeply spiritual civilizations, bathroom humor found its place. But this wasn't vulgarity, it was humanity. A wink from one generation to the next that yes, we may pray to Vishnu, recite mantras, and debate Dharma, but we all still have mornings when we shouldn't have eaten the second helping of chickpea curry. So what do we learn from ancient India? That toilets aren't just functional, they're symbolic. They reflect our beliefs about the body, the world, and how we should move through it. They remind us that cleanliness isn't just next to godliness, it's part of the same architecture, and that maybe, just maybe, true enlightenment begins with an empty stomach and a clear path to the latrine. So tonight, if you're sipping warm tea and staring out the window, remember, someone once built a sewer system in 2500 BCE. Someone wrote poetry about bowel movements. Someone chose to squat facing south, just in case. Because when the body and soul are in balance, even going to the bathroom becomes sacred. Ah, the Victorian era. A time of elegance, empire, and embroidery, of stiff collars and stiffer morals. Where tea was served at 4, emotions were bottled at all times, and everyone pretended not to have bodily functions. But behind the lace curtains and gas lamps was a very different truth. A truth that lurked beneath floorboards, rose from street grates, and occasionally exploded in full view. The truth was, toilets were a nightmare. Let's set the scene. It's London. 1852. Horse-drawn carriages rattle down cobbled streets. Gentlemen tip their hats. Ladies adjust their gloves. And the Thames reeks like a crime scene. Why? Because nearly everything chamber pot contents, household slop, dead animals, industrial runoff was dumped into the river. And not metaphorically, literally. Even the toilets, where they existed, flushed directly into the Thames. And the Thames was also where people bathed, fished, and drew their drinking water. It was a cycle. A terrifying, foul-smelling cycle. Enter the great stink of 1858. That summer, a heat wave turned the already polluted river into a gaseous swamp. The smell was so unbearable that Parliament draped curtains soaked in vinegar across its windows, not for aesthetics. For survival, meetings were cancelled, papers were abandoned. One report described the smell as utterly disgusting, enough to knock down a horse. Meanwhile, people were dying of cholera by the thousands. For years, no one understood why. The popular theory? Miasma, bad air. Foul smells were thought to cause disease, which, to be fair, wasn't completely wrong. Just one step away from the actual culprit: contaminated water. Let's talk about toilets. Victorian homes, particularly in cities, ranged from lavish mansions with indoor plumbing to crumbling tenements with no toilet at all. In the latter, families shared outdoor privies, simple wooden boxes over a pit, often overflowing, rarely cleaned. If you were lucky, a night soil man came to empty it. He arrived in darkness, wearing boots, gloves, and an expression of deep regret. He scooped the waste into barrels and carted it off. Where to? Fields, rivers, or sometimes just the alley next door. These men worked in silence. Not because they were mysterious, but because no one wanted to talk about them. They were invisible labor, and yet utterly essential. Middle-class homes had water closets, small rooms with porcelain fixtures and pull chains. Some even had fancy tank designs shaped like acorns, but plumbing was primitive. Pipes leaked, cisterns failed, and sewer gas was bold. To mask it, people used perfumed toilet paper or kept lavender sachets near the bowl. Some even burned incense while doing their business. Others simply left the window open and prayed for wind. And if you were poor, you used a thunderbox, a wooden bench with a hole and a removable pan beneath. You did your business, closed the lid, and hoped someone remembered to empty it before breakfast. Spoiler: they didn't always. In tenements, entire floors shared a single box. Children fell in, rats moved in, diseases spread. And the smell crept up through the cracks in the floorboards, the stairwell, the dreams. Still, talking about toilets was taboo. Victorian decorum insisted that bodily functions did not exist. People wrote books about etiquette, but few addressed the pressing issue of where to go when you had too much goose pie and not enough plumbing. When Thomas Crapper, yes, his real name, began producing flush toilets in the late 1800s, he didn't invent them, but he did make them respectable. His advertisements featured elegant fixtures, floral engravings, and the promise of sanitary modernity. He even opened a showroom. Visitors could browse toilets like art, examine the plumbing, pull the chain, whisper to each other in reverent tones. It was, in its own way, revolutionary. But acceptance took time. Some Victorians feared flush toilets were too powerful. They worried about sudden splashes, about being sucked in, about moral decay somehow. In 1875, one London woman refused to sit on her new water closet because she believed it could whistle up the devil. Others just missed the old ways. Chamber pots under beds, newspaper squares for wiping, a simple life, a smellier one. Still, progress pressed on. By the end of the century, public toilets were appearing in parks and train stations, for men. Women? Not so much. Society feared that if women had easy access to toilets, they might wander too far from home, or worse, become independent. Some cities resisted installing ladies' conveniences for decades, citing moral and architectural concerns. As one critic put it, "Where shall it go? Next to a flower bed." The solution eventually was to hide them. Underground stalls, discreet entrances, euphemistic signs, and always a charge for entry. Yes, women paid to pee. Men? Not always. It was symbolic, really. So what do we take from all this? That the Victorian toilet was more than a fixture. It was a battleground of science versus superstition, privacy versus practicality, decorum versus digestion. And sometimes it was just a disaster. So tonight, as you flush your clean, ceramic, whisper-soft toilet, spare a moment for the citizens of 19th century London, for the maids who scrubbed the chamber pots, for the men who shoveled waste at midnight, for the lawmakers who gagged behind vinegar-soaked curtains. Because when the river runs with filth, it's hard to sip tea and pretend everything smells like roses. Sometimes history stinks, literally. Let's begin with a nightmare. You're standing waist-deep in a stone-walled pit. The walls are slick with moisture, The air is thick, not just with smell, but with a kind of spiritual despair. Your hands are raw. Your back aches. And somewhere above you, a child flushes a chamber pot. It's not raining, but something's dripping anyway. Welcome to the world of the gong farmer. Yes, that was the real name. In 16th century England, when castles had garderobes, tenements had buckets, and sewage systems were more wish than fact, somebody had to clean up the mess. That somebody was the gong farmer. The job was simple. You dug out cesspits by hand, at night. Why at night? Well, imagine the smell. Now imagine that smell fermenting in a pit beneath a tavern full of drunk men eating stewed eel. Then imagine digging into it with a shovel, while people above continue to contribute. Daylight made it worse, so the work happened after sundown. The gong farmer arrived with tools, buckets, and sometimes a donkey cart. He would descend into the pit, sometimes 6, 8, even 12 feet deep, shovel out the human waste, and haul it up bucket by bucket. It was then carted out of the city, dumped in designated fields, or sold. Yes, sold. Because, believe it or not, human waste was valuable. Farmers used it to fertilize crops. Dried waste could be burned for fuel, and in some areas it was even used in the making of bricks. So the gong farmer wasn't just a janitor. He was part of the urban economy. Paid well, too. Records show that some gong farmers earned twice the wage of a carpenter. It was dirty work, dangerous work, but also vital and oddly respected at a distance. No one invited a gong farmer to dinner, but everyone wanted him to show up on time. The term gong comes from the Old English gang, as in to go. A gong pit was a going place, and a gong farmer was the one who dealt with the aftermath. They wore thick boots, leather aprons, and occasionally masks soaked in herbs. None of it helped much. The smell clung to their clothes, their skin, their souls. And yet, they kept showing up. London alone had hundreds of cesspits. Beneath houses, taverns, churches, the stench was so bad that some churches held services with windows closed year-round, even in summer. Chamber pots were emptied directly into the street, or tossed out windows with a cry of "Gardez-le," a corruption of the French "Regardez-l'eau," or "Watch out for the water." But there was no water, only other things. If you were walking down an alley in Tudor London, you learned quickly to hug the wall, not for safety, but because everything ran downhill, and every few months a gong farmer would arrive to dig out the pit beneath your home. He worked slowly, carefully, sometimes with a team, sometimes alone. If the pit was large enough, he might be lowered down on a rope, shovel in hand. It was hot, it was dark. And yes, people died. Gases built up, walls collapsed, drownings occurred. One report describes a man who fell into a full pit and suffocated before help could arrive. Another tells of a gong farmer who dropped a lantern, igniting methane gas and causing an explosion. That's right, he blew up a toilet. From the inside. The job came with regulations. In some cities, gong farmers had to register with the guild. They were restricted from working during the day. They had designated dumping grounds outside city walls. They were barred from living in certain districts. They were essential, but also contaminated, socially, spiritually, sometimes literally. Fast forward to 18th and 19th century America, and the role continues now under a new name, the night soil man. Same job, new continent. In cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, before the rise of municipal sewer systems, people kept waste in backyard privies, pits covered by small wooden outhouses. When they filled up, someone had to empty them. Enter the night soil man. He worked in silence, carried a ladder, a long-handled dipper, a lantern, a cart. He arrived after midnight, slipped into yards, emptied the pits, hauled the buckets away. No one spoke to him, no one paid him in the light of day, but everyone was grateful. Sometimes his cart leaked. There are stories, half jokes, half tragedies, of people waking to find their cobbled streets smeared with a mysterious brown slick. Horses slipped, shoes were ruined, lawsuits were filed. But the work continued, because without the night soil man, cities would drown in their own waste. And they nearly did. Before modern sanitation, disease outbreaks were common. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, all linked to contaminated water and poor waste removal. The work of these quiet, smelly labourers saved lives even if they were never thanked. There were variations too. In Japan, human waste was collected for fertilizer by specialized teams. Contracts were signed, buckets were labeled, rich families produced more valuable waste. A strange, very literal form of class-based excrement economics. In Paris, the vidangeurs plied their trade with carts and long-handled ladles, navigating narrow alleys, cursing at cats, and sloshing waste through the night. In rural Ireland, waste was used to build turf walls. In Mongolia, dried dung was fuel. In Iceland, it was burned in fires to keep warm through winter nights. One man's poop is another man's power source, and always someone had to collect it. So the next time you flush a toilet and walk away without a thought, pause. Remember the man in leather boots, waist deep in filth, lifting bucket after bucket for a city that would rather forget him. The gong farmer, the night man, the silent, smelly heroes of sanitation. They didn't write poems, they didn't build cathedrals, but they kept the streets from flooding, the alleys from rotting, the cities from choking on themselves. And sometimes, that's enough. Picture this. You're caught short in ancient Athens. You duck behind a column, do your business, wipe with a pebble. And just as you're adjusting your tunic, a city official appears and informs you you've broken the law. Because in Athens, even toilet behavior was regulated. Yes, truly. Across history, civilizations have written laws to control everything from taxes to attire, and occasionally how, where, and when you could go to the bathroom. Some of them were practical, some were bizarre, some were so specific you can't help but wonder what incident inspired them. Let's start in ancient Greece. The Athenians were famously hygienic. Bathhouses, public toilets, water carriers, but even they had their limits. It was illegal, for example, to defecate within sight of a temple under penalty of a fine or, in some cases, public humiliation, which makes sense. Nothing says worship like stepping over a surprise in the marble courtyard. But it gets weirder. One Athenian ordinance prohibited the use of sharp objects in public latrines. Why? Because men were wiping with broken pottery shards called peswai and occasionally reused ones found on the floor. Needless to say, injuries occurred. And those injuries weren't minor. Laws followed. Now let's jump to Rome. The Romans loved rules. They regulated bathhouse hours, street drainage, and the placement of urinals. In fact, Emperor Vespasian famously imposed a urine tax in the 1st century CE. Collectors harvested urine from public toilets used for tanning leather and cleaning clothes, and paid a fee. It was so lucrative, Vespasian's name became a euphemism for public toilets across Europe. The law was controversial. His son, Titus, mocked it. Vespasian held up a coin and asked, "Do you smell anything?" Titus said no. "Yet it comes from urine," the emperor replied. "Petunia non olet." Money doesn't stink. Centuries later, Charlemagne's court had rules about servants relieving themselves within castle grounds. Offenders could be whipped, fined, or made to clean latrines by hand. In medieval monasteries, the rules got stricter. Monks were forbidden from speaking during toilet visits, even to warn someone the seat was occupied. This led to some awkward encounters, as you might imagine. And in 14th century Paris, a city overwhelmed by filth, the king passed a law requiring every household to keep a chamber pot with a tight-fitting lid. Dumping contents out the window without shouting, "Take care below," was punishable by fine or, in one case, being forced to scrub the alley by hand while wearing a hat shaped like a toilet seat. You can't make that up. But it wasn't just Europe. In ancient Japan, public latrines had rules posted outside. Silence was encouraged. Waste collectors had right of way. And urinating on sacred ground was punishable by public apology and ritual purification, which involved bathing in cold water and sitting on a rock in contemplation. In China's Qing dynasty, the emperor's court maintained detailed logs, no pun intended, of who used what toilet and when. Attendants recorded bowel movement frequency, color, and consistency for imperial health reports. That's right, your poop was documented for posterity. Meanwhile, in 18th century Scotland, there was a law against relieving oneself on bridges. Apparently, locals had taken to squatting mid-crossing, treating the river below as a convenient flushing system. Fines were issued, bridges were patrolled. One sheriff noted in his ledger, 3 men caught pants, down upon the Tay, fined and made to scrub the planks. Rain, unfortunately, was absent. But the most infamous toilet law might belong to Victorian Britain. During the Great Stink, public pressure mounted for cities to provide public restrooms, especially for women. But conservative leaders resisted. One minister declared that the encouragement of female urination in public space invites moral decline. Translation: ladies should hold it, for Queen and country. In the absence of legal facilities, women sometimes used alleyways or improvised with cloaks. Some were arrested for indecency, others for disorderly urination. Men? They had urinals on nearly every block. Fairness was not part of the plumbing plan. Even in the 20th century, laws continued to evolve. In 1922 New York, there were ordinances regulating the number of restrooms in theaters after audiences began rioting when intermission lines stretched for hours. One report reads, 5 women fainted, 6 men fought, all because of insufficient facilities. In modern-day Singapore, flushing a public toilet is mandatory by law. Failure to flush can result in a fine of up to $150. Inspectors patrol restrooms. Some are even equipped with sensors. You don't flush? The toilet tattles. Meanwhile, in Australia, some local councils have toilet graffiti ordinances not just banning obscenity, but regulating joke quality. One city in Queensland posted signs encouraging clever limericks only in stalls. Apparently bad puns are a crime against humanity. And let's not forget prisons. Incarcerated individuals often face toilet regulations far more restrictive than anything else. Some cells have no doors, others have scheduled bathroom times. In extreme cases, toilets are shut off, and inmates must beg guards for permission. In one infamous case, an inmate sued after being denied access for 12 hours. The ruling? Cruel and unusual punishment. The damages? $1. Toilets, it seems, are where justice and indignity often meet. But perhaps the strangest punishment comes from medieval Germany. In certain towns, men convicted of public drunkenness and urinating in fountains were sentenced to wear a wooden barrel cut at the bottom with their arms poking through the sides. They were paraded through the town square, jeered, and sometimes dunked in the river for good measure. The message was clear: don't turn public space into your private latrine. So what do we make of all this? That across time and culture, toilets have never been just about waste. They're about control, cleanliness, and collective anxiety. They're where law meets biology, where shame meets infrastructure, where the sacred and profane sit side by side. And for every flush there's a rule, sometimes unwritten, sometimes etched in marble, sometimes enforced by a monk with very high standards and a very small sponge. So next time you use a public toilet without getting arrested, fined, or forced into a barrel suit, count yourself lucky. You're living in the golden age of going. War is hell, and in that hell, there's often a moment awkward, urgent, inevitable when a soldier must face a second kind of battle, the desperate need to relieve himself while bullets fly overhead. Because yes, even in the chaos of war, people still have to poop. Let's begin in the trenches. World War I France, mud as far as the eye can see, men packed shoulder to shoulder, shells falling, rats scurrying, and somewhere near the back of the line, a latrine trench. That's what they called it. Not a toilet, not a restroom, a trench dug specifically for human waste. Usually shallow, uncovered, and positioned just far enough from the main lines that you could get there if you didn't mind a sprint through sniper range. There were no doors, no privacy, no ventilation, just a pit and a wooden plank to squat over. Sometimes the enemy could see you. Sometimes they didn't wait. Stories abound of soldiers caught mid-squat during artillery barrages. Some ran with their pants down, others simply stayed put and hoped for the best. One British corporal wrote, "The latrine trench was our most hated post. Not for the smell, for the fear. You never knew if your last squat would be just that." Sanitation was a nightmare. With hundreds of men rotating through the same space, disease spread fast. Dysentery, typhoid, trench foot. The smell of unburied waste mixed with mud, cordite, and sweat. The latrines overflowed. Buckets were sometimes used, emptied rarely. One field manual recommended soldiers cover their deposit with quicklime, if available. Quicklime was not often available, and yet the soldiers adapted. Some brought books, others told jokes. One unit in the Canadian Corps built a throne out of sandbags and painted it gold. They called it the Duke's Seat. Officers got first dibs. In winter, the latrine froze solid. In summer, it boiled with flies. Still, men queued up, because the alternative, going behind the trench, or worse, in your own corner, was both unsanitary and deeply unpopular. Moving further back in history, during Napoleon's campaigns, soldiers relieved themselves wherever possible, behind trees, in tents, along the roadside. Officers had chamber pots, privates had nothing. One French sergeant wrote of a battlefield where the stench rose before the smoke cleared. Corpses, yes, but also thousands of unburied piles from an army on the march. Napoleon himself reportedly carried a portable bidet, yes, a ceramic bowl, perfumed water, and a folding privacy screen. Meanwhile, his troops used their helmets, not during combat, of course. But in moments of desperation, the helmets were cleaned after, usually. In ancient warfare, sanitation was equally dire. Roman armies built latrine trenches behind camp lines. These were angled to drain downhill. Soldiers used wooden sticks with cloth called tussorium, soaked in vinegar for cleaning. These were shared, reused, washed between uses if time allowed. Sometimes, the same tussorium made the rounds of an entire cohort. One legionnaire wrote that he preferred leaves, even poisonous ones. In medieval warfare, things were worse. Siege armies camped for months around castles. Waste was buried in shallow pits or not buried at all. One chronicler described the ground around a besieging army as muddy with rain and rank with ordure. Defenders had it rough too. Castles weren't designed for sieges that lasted half a year. Garderobes filled up, buckets overflowed. Waste was dumped down walls occasionally onto the attackers below. In one siege, a castle's defenders reportedly dumped rotting animal carcasses and human excrement into enemy trenches to spread disease. It worked. The besieging army withdrew 3 weeks later, overcome by dysentery. Fast forward to World War II. Sanitation was better. Field toilets called Elson buckets by the British were issued to squads. These were metal cans lined with sawdust, emptied when possible, burned when not. American GIs had cat holes, small pits dug by each man, used once, then covered. But in jungle warfare Burma, the Pacific, Vietnam latrines were hard to dig. The ground was too soft, too wet, or too visible. So soldiers used plastic bags, tin cans, even empty ammo boxes. One Marine in Guadalcanal recalled doing his business in a helmet while crouched behind a log, watching for snipers. He called it the most vulnerable moment of my deployment. Airborne units had it worse. Paratroopers in planes were known to use plastic tubes, tied off at the end. If turbulence hit midstream, things got messy. Bomber crews had relief tubes, metal funnels attached to the fuselage with a pipe leading outside. Problem was, at high altitudes, everything froze. The result was called blue ice, and it sometimes detached mid-flight, with consequences. There are stories, half rumour, half report, of frozen urine crashing through farmhouse roofs in rural France. Whether true or not, it paints a picture. And in submarines, toilet use was a science. On German U-boats, each toilet had a complex system of valves. Using it required training. One error could flood the cabin with seawater and everything else. In one infamous case, a sailor flushed incorrectly, flooded the compartment, and forced the sub to surface within range of enemy fire. They were sunk by poop. In Vietnam, jungle latrines were dug behind camp. But at night, soldiers used P-tubes, angled pipes driven into the ground. Just wide enough, just deep enough, just desperate enough. No privacy, no ceremony, just survival. So what does this tell us? That in war, bodily needs don't take orders. They arrive when they please. And whether you're in a trench, a jungle, or a tank, finding a moment to relieve yourself without being shot, shelled, or shamed is a victory in itself. Toilets on the battlefield are not about comfort. They're about humanity. In the middle of chaos, to squat, to breathe, to wipe, to bury, and to walk away alive is a quiet triumph. So tonight, if you're tucked in bed, toilet nearby, no mortars falling, no latrine trench to share with 12 other people and a family of rats, take a moment and be thankful you're not pooping under fire. Let's talk about power. Not the kind you plug into the wall, not even the kind that wears a crown. We're talking about the quiet, daily kind, the kind that says, you can go here, you can't. Because for much of human history, the toilet hasn't just been a necessity, it's been a symbol of who mattered, who didn't, who got to go in peace, and who had to wait, walk, or hold it. Let's start with the Romans. Their public toilets were famous stone benches with keyhole openings, lined up side by side, no partitions, no privacy, dozens of bottoms, one room. You talked, you joked, you did your business, but not everyone sat on the same marble. The best toilets, cleanest, most central, stocked with fresh water and sponge sticks, were located near basilicas, forums, or baths. And guess who got access? Wealthy men. Slaves? They cleaned the toilets, replaced the sponges, dug out the sewage channels, but they weren't always allowed to use the seats themselves. In fact, some Roman estates had private latrines for masters and separate, often outdoor pits for servants. One noblewoman's diary fragment describes being offended that her chambermaid used the indoor toilet without permission. Because nothing says empire like segregated bathroom rights. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and the pattern continues. Castles had garderobes, sometimes dozens. Lords had one by their chamber. Servants shared the one off the kitchen. Visitors? You hoped for a bucket. In many towns, toilet access was tied to taxes. If you paid, you could use the cleaner public facilities. If not, you made do behind a shed, or a wall, or a very patient tree. Public outhouses had two entrances, ladies and gentlemen, but inside, stalls weren't equal. The gentleman's side might have a seat with a lid, the labourer side, a hole in a plank. Same purpose, different dignity. Jump to Victorian England, and things escalate. Public toilets called comfort stations were built in cities, but they weren't free. Men paid a penny, women often paid more. Why? Because female modesty requires finer furnishings. According to one council memo, translation, to pee while female costs extra. Working-class women, often out all day in factories or markets, had fewer options. Some held it, some ducked into alleyways, some simply didn't drink water, leading to chronic bladder issues. In colonial India, British officials built lavish toilets in officers' quarters, porcelain bowls, water tanks, even scented paper. Meanwhile, native staff were restricted to separate, often open-air facilities, sometimes without roofs or drains. Signs made it clear, Sahibs only. It was more than plumbing. It was policy. And when India gained independence, one of the first acts of Mahatma Gandhi's sanitation campaign was to promote toilet equality, including personally cleaning latrines to challenge caste taboos. Because yes, in India, caste and toilets are deeply entangled. For centuries, untouchables were forced to clean dry latrines by hand. No gloves, no masks, just baskets. They carried human waste on their heads, a daily ritual of humiliation. Some villages barred Dalits from using public toilets altogether. Even today, in parts of rural India, caste discrimination still determines who gets to go where. But it's not just caste. Let's talk about race. In Jim Crow America, public toilets were segregated by law. Whites-only signs hung above porcelain thrones. Black Americans were forced to use separate facilities, often fewer, smaller, and poorly maintained. In train stations, parks, restaurants, the rules were the same. 2 doors, 2 rules, 2 Americas. Traveling while black meant planning toilet breaks in advance. Green books, the travel guides for black motorists, often listed safe restrooms along with hotels and diners. One traveler recalled driving 100 miles out of his way just to find a bathroom he was allowed to use. The message was clear: your dignity doesn't belong here. Even after desegregation, the scars remained. In many cities, restrooms weren't labeled anymore, but they weren't integrated either. Staff suggested alternatives. Locked doors malfunctioned, a quiet sort of exclusion, and the legacy lingers. Today, data shows that in some low-income, predominantly black or Latino neighborhoods, public restroom access is still limited. Fewer facilities, shorter hours, worse upkeep. Toilets, it seems, remember things. Let's jump forward again. Modern offices. It's 1982nd Tokyo. A new tower opens downtown, dozens of floors, hundreds of workers, dozens of toilets, all labeled male. Women? They got 1 stall per 3 floors. If they complained, they were told, "There aren't that many of you." Sound familiar? Even now, in many industries, women queue longer, wait more, and face more awkwardness around breaks. Not just in buildings, in politics. One female senator once walked half a block to a public toilet because the legislative chamber didn't have one for women. When they finally built it, she joked, "Now we can finally pass legislation and the bladder test." But let's go further. What if you don't fit either category? Trans and non-binary individuals often face bathroom discrimination not by plumbing, but by policy. Bathroom bills in the US have targeted who can use which facilities, turning restrooms into battlegrounds. Harassment, denial of access, violence all over where someone goes to pee. One survey found that nearly 60% of trans Americans avoided public restrooms for fear of confrontation. Some developed health issues, others simply stayed home. All because society still tries to define people by stalls. So what do we learn from all this? That toilets aren't neutral. They reflect our values, our biases, our willingness to draw lines even in porcelain. They reveal who we think deserves comfort, privacy, safety, and who we expect to hold it. So tonight, when you use your bathroom without fear, shame, or a keycard swipe, consider the quiet privilege of that moment. Because in a world where so many were told they couldn't go, where they wanted, when they needed, your flush is a freedom. It begins with silence. A hush falls over the courtyard, shoes are removed, hands are washed, and then just before stepping into the toilet, a prayer is whispered. Because in many faiths, relieving yourself is not just biological, it's spiritual. Let's start with Islam. In traditional practice, Muslims begin with a dua, a short supplication asking for protection from impurity and evil. Because the bathroom, in Islamic tradition, is considered a place of vulnerability, a space where one is exposed both physically and spiritually. Demons or jinn are said to linger in such spaces. So you enter with your left foot, never your right. And when you leave, you exit with your right foot, saying another prayer of gratitude. Washing is mandatory, not optional. Known as istinja, it involves cleaning with water, not paper, and it's done thoroughly, with the left hand only. In fact, traditional Islamic etiquette has entire chapters devoted to toilet behavior, how to sit, where to face, what to avoid saying inside. Facing Mecca while relieving yourself? Forbidden. Speaking, eating, or bringing holy texts into the bathroom? Strongly discouraged. It's not just about hygiene. It's about respecting the divine even in moments of bodily need. Now let's cross over to Judaism. In Talmudic law, the bathroom was treated as a zone of impurity but also of profound humility. Before and after relieving oneself, religious Jews recite the Asher Yatzar, blessing a praise of God's wisdom in designing the human body. It's a prayer that marvels at the body's openings, cavities, and functions. Think about that. A religion that literally thanks the Creator, that everything is still working properly. If one of them were to be blocked, the prayer says, we could not survive. It's spiritual. It's anatomical. It's honest. No sugarcoating. Just deep reverence for the miraculous mechanics of digestion. And then there's Hinduism. Cleanliness, both physical and moral, is central. Toilets are traditionally located outside the home, far from the kitchen or sleeping areas. Waste is considered ritually impure ashuddha. After defecating, one is expected to bathe fully. Yes, fully. In older rural customs, people would walk to the edge of the village, relieve themselves in the fields, and return for a bucket bath before entering the household space again. Toilets, in many cases, were not attached to homes at all. They were separate structures, sometimes even across the street. Why? Because spiritual contamination was believed to spread not just through sight or touch, but through proximity. In sacred texts, toilet rituals were part of daily dharma, the way to live in harmony with the universe. And in temple cities like Varanasi, public toilets were sometimes monitored by ritual attendants who enforced rules of washing, drying, and silent conduct. It wasn't just manners, it was devotion. Let's take a different path now, Catholicism. In medieval Europe, monasteries developed complex toilet systems, long stone shafts leading out to rivers or pits. But monks weren't just concerned about plumbing, they had rules. Strict rules. You couldn't relieve yourself during certain hours of the day, or during prayer time. In some orders, monks had to raise a hand and request permission from a superior to leave for the latrine. One abbey log from 1,267 notes that Brother Thomas was punished with 3 days of silent reflection for inappropriate urgency during Vespers. In other words, he ran out mid-prayer and got busted. Confession manuals even included guidelines for toilet thoughts. Linger too long? Indulge impure imagination? Fail to wipe with dignity? It was all subject to scrutiny, because even bathroom behavior could reflect the state of your soul. In Buddhism, the approach is different, but no less deliberate. In monasteries across Tibet, Thailand, and Japan, toilets are part of the meditative routine. Monks clean them daily, often with reverence. In some Zen monasteries, there's a tradition known as toilet Zen. The act of scrubbing the latrine floor, walls, bucket is treated as a spiritual exercise. One monk wrote, If I cannot clean the latrine with love, how can I clean the mind? It's not a punishment. It's a practice. Some temples even hold short ceremonies before scrubbing begins, a chant, a bow, a moment of breath. And while relieving oneself, silence is observed, not because the act is shameful, but because attention is sacred. Every moment, yes, even this one, is part of the path. Now let's detour into the unexpected. In Shinto, Japan's native religion, cleanliness is godliness literally. Shinto shrines have no toilets on site, none. You must relieve yourself elsewhere before approaching the sacred. Why? Because kega impurity can defile a holy place. Even stepping into a shrine while unclean is discouraged. This includes unwashed hands, exposed wounds, and yes, having just been to the bathroom without purifying. Some traditional homes in Japan even kept the toilet room entirely separate from the rest of the architecture, including a different kind of flooring, wall material, and ventilation. It's not just design, it's doctrine. Now, before we get too reverent, let's remember, religion also has a sense of humor about these things. There's a Talmudic passage where rabbis debate whether it's permissible to relieve oneself on a windy hill because of concerns about spray and dignity. In medieval Christian manuscripts, there are marginal drawings, monks on chamber pots, angels recoiling from gas, even demons hiding in latrines. Why? Because the toilet, for all its sacred boundaries, is also deeply human, a place where everyone, king, priest, or pauper, is briefly humbled. And that's perhaps the point, that even in the holiest traditions people recognize that what goes in must come out. That spirituality is not about pretending we don't have bodies. It's about learning to live in them respectfully, mindfully, and with just enough reverence to flush with care. So next time you step into the bathroom, imagine the long lineage behind you, saints, monks, mystics, sages, each one pausing, bowing, whispering a blessing before they do their business. Because even in the smallest rooms, the sacred waits. Imagine walking into a bathroom, the lights turn on automatically, a soft melody begins to play, the toilet lid lifts on its own like a futuristic butler welcoming you to the throne. This isn't science fiction. This is Japan, specifically a high-end Tokyo hotel where the toilet seat is heated, the bowl glows at night, and there's a panel of buttons more complex than a space shuttle dashboard. Welcome to the age of the smart toilet. Let's start with the basics. The bidet has evolved. Modern Japanese models feature heated seats, adjustable water jets, built-in air dryers, odor-neutralizing filters, deodorizing sprays, ambient music, yes, really, pressure and temperature settings, and sometimes a built-in AI. Some even greet you by name. One model syncs with your phone and tracks your usage, offering hydration reminders based on color and frequency. Another uses machine learning to suggest dietary changes based on, let's say, output texture. Privacy has become data. Your toilet now knows more about your fiber intake than your doctor. But Japan isn't alone. In South Korea, smart toilets are a status symbol. Some models light up when you enter. Others have motion detectors that prevent flushing if you're still in session. There's even a toilet that plays soothing waterfall sounds to mask any audible emissions. And yes, it comes with Bluetooth. But technology doesn't stop at convenience. Let's talk about health monitoring. Some toilets now feature urinalysis sensors that detect glucose, protein, or ketones, stool scanners that flag abnormalities, pressure sensors that measure how long you sit and how often. One startup in California developed a health mirror that reads your face while you poop, checking for signs of anemia, dehydration, or stress. It's like a physical exam, with flushing, but sometimes tech goes rogue. Let's revisit the infamous AI toilet assistant prototype from 2022. Marketed as a friendly bathroom companion, It greeted users with affirmations. "You got this. One push at a time." Unfortunately, it also had voice recognition issues. Multiple testers reported being loudly misidentified. One poor man stepped in late at night, only to hear, "Welcome back, Grandma Ruth." The project was shelved, but the idea lives on. Meanwhile, in Europe, eco-toilets have taken the stage. Water-saving models use just 1 litre per flush, some powered by foot pedals or harvested rainwater. In Sweden, public restrooms sometimes feature urine-diverting dry toilets. These separate liquid and solid waste for composting. You pee in one bowl, poop in another. Instructions are provided. Diagrams, labels, sometimes a helpful rhyme. If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, aim down. But not all futuristic toilets are elegant. Let's explore the bizarre and the bold. In 2016, a company in China released the toilet of the future, a golden capsule with a reclining chair, USB ports, Wi-Fi, mood lighting, and a built-in karaoke machine. That's right, you could sing while you sit. It was a hit with influencers, less so with plumbers. Over in Silicon Valley, a startup pitched a subscription-based toilet, $39.99 month. Features included automatic delivery of bamboo toilet paper, cloud-based analytics, and a points system for green behavior. Flush with less water? Get a badge. Use air dry mode? Earn a leaf. Brag to your friends? Unavoidable. Backlash was swift. It turns out, no one wants their toilet to have terms and conditions, but the ambition continued. In 2020, Michigan tea researchers unveiled a prototype capable of scanning your anal print. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like, as a means of secure identification. Their rationale? Biometrics meet bio-wasta. It sparked a wave of questions. What happens if a guest uses it? Do you want to be identified mid-defecation? Can you really call it privacy if your toilet says your name? Meanwhile, over in pet tech, there's a smart litter box for cats that monitors feline bowel movements and sends alerts to your phone. Mittens has not pooped in 36 hours. Thanks, toilet. I was worried. It includes a built-in scale, smell sensor, and LED lighting for ambiance, one assumes. And in case you're wondering, yes, someone made a dog version. They called it the Pooch Potty Pro. It plays barking sounds when activated. Why? We may never know, but innovation knows no bounds. At a recent design fair, one contestant proposed a toilet drone, a mobile unit that flies to remote locations, lands, unfolds into a private stall, and flies away after use. Yes, really. It ran on solar power. Won third place. The second place went to a self-cleaning toilet suit for festival goers, essentially a wearable bathroom bag. It included a hydration tube, odor sealant, and a poncho. Practical? Maybe. Dystopian? Definitely. But here's the question. Why all this? Why pour billions into toilet tech? Because modern life is obsessed with comfort, control, and data. We want our most basic moments to be optimized, sanitized, measured, and, if possible, accompanied by lo-fi music. Yet with every upgrade, we get further from the simple act, to pee in peace, to poop without performance, to exist in a moment that's entirely ours, not live-streamed, not tracked, not tweeted. So tonight, as you visit your bathroom, consider this. Does your toilet talk? Does it track? Does it know your birthday? And if the answer is no, that might be a blessing, because while future toilets promise insight, personalization, and laser-aimed bidets, sometimes the best feature is silence. No lights, no data, just a handle, a flush, and the ancient dignity of going your way. Let's take a step back, zoom out, because after 2 hours of latrines, levers, and literal pits of despair, maybe you're wondering, why does any of this matter? It's just a toilet, a place you visit, ideally 2 to 3 times a day. You don't talk about it at parties. You don't write poems about it. You certainly don't expect a bedtime story to take you here. And yet here we are. Because toilets, as we've now seen, are not just about waste. They're about power, about class, about culture, war, ritual, shame, and innovation, about being human. Let's retrace our steps. We began in ancient Rome on marble benches without partitions, where senators sat cheek to cheek while discussing grain prices and military conquests, where sponges on sticks were shared, and the flush came courtesy of running water, if you could afford it. From there, we slid down into medieval castles, where chutes of doom hung over walls, and garderobes were built into towers venting stink onto the heads of passing peasants. Kings relieved themselves in wooden boxes, often while dictating letters. In Japan, toilets were spiritual boundaries. You took off your shoes, you bowed to cleanliness, you exited with your right foot, leaving impurity behind. In India, to relieve yourself meant crossing thresholds, ritual, social, and physical. You didn't just go, you performed a dance of distance, of washing, of remembering who you were allowed to be and where. Then came the battlefield, where the trench was life and death, where men risked sniper fire for a chance to squat in peace, where helmets became vessels of last resort, where even submarines could be sunk by a misflush. And let's not forget the hidden wars, the signs that read, "Whites only." The janitor closets turned into coloured restrooms. The stairs trans people were asked to climb just to find a stall they could enter without fear, or the caste lines drawn in latrine ash, or the children told to wait, to hold it, because their neighbourhood didn't have a public bathroom and their voices didn't count. We visited monasteries where silent monks had to raise a hand for permission to poop, and future bathrooms where AI bidets greet you by name and offer praise for your hydration levels. And somewhere along the way, beneath the history, the absurdity, the poetry of plumbing, we discovered a pattern that the toilet is the great leveller. No matter your wealth, your beliefs, your bloodline, at some point, your body will tap you on the shoulder and whisper, "Hey, it's time." And in that moment, you are no longer a king, a monk, a tech CEO, or a tired graduate student scrolling YouTube at 1:37 a.m. You're just you, in need of a small space to let go. And maybe, just maybe, that's why this history matters, because it reminds us that being human means eating, processing, eliminating, and doing it all with some measure of dignity. So tonight, as you drift off, think about this. The next time you flush, you're participating in one of the oldest rituals known to mankind. A ritual once done in pits, buckets, trenches, rivers, holes, caves, palaces, porta-potties, golden thrones, and occasionally into the wind by a medieval monk who really should have waited. You're part of a story that stretches across millennia, from Babylonian clay seats to smart toilets with built-in night lights. You're not alone. You've never been. We've all been there. Behind the curtain, above the chute, in the woods, in the queue, on the trail, in the tiny stall with the broken lock and no paper. And we've survived, because the history of the toilet is, in the end, the history of us. Messy, necessary, occasionally funny, often inconvenient, but deeply, undeniably real. So rest easy tonight. You've learned more than most do in a lifetime about what it truly means to go. You've walked through kingdoms and gutters, across continents and centuries, and now all that's left is peace. Dim the lights, let the fan hum, and sleep soundly knowing that no matter where you are or where you go next, you are always, absolutely, human. Let's start with a memory. You're 6 years old, sitting in class. You raise your hand not to answer a question, but to ask the most dangerous request in all of childhood. "Can I go to the bathroom?" The teacher hesitates. She sighs, looks at the clock, And then, with mild exasperation, waves you out. You run. Because even at 6, you understand that bodily needs are something to be managed quietly. That shame, it sticks. And it didn't come from nowhere. Let's rewind. In the Victorian era, the toilet was barely spoken of. Entire architectural blueprints were drawn up so that lavatories would never be visible from public rooms. Pipes were hidden behind walls. Flush mechanisms were muffled. Even the word toilet was considered vulgar. Instead, people said, the water closet, the necessary, the convenience, the little room, the powder room, a whole thesaurus of euphemism because admitting to having a body was just unseemly. If you were a lady, you didn't go, you freshened up. If you were a gentleman, you stepped out for a moment. What for? Don't ask. And this wasn't just manners, it was morality. In many circles, the act of relieving oneself was considered too base, too earthy, too animal. To speak of it was to admit that you, like the beasts, had needs. This wasn't universal, of course. Peasants didn't have the luxury of being precious. When your toilet is a hole behind the barn, discretion isn't really an option. But among the educated classes, silence became virtue. One etiquette guide from 1,853 advised young women never to say the word bathroom in mixed company. Instead, they should excuse themselves with a cough and a glance toward the hallway. Even fiction played along. Characters disappeared offstage for minutes at a time. But no one ever said why. Even in vast epics covering war, famine, passion, betrayal, no one ever had to pee. It was as if authors feared that a single mention of a chamber pot would topple the illusion. Even in film, this silence endured. Did you know the first toilet flush ever heard in a Hollywood movie wasn't until Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960? Before that, toilets were seen, at most, in passing. Never heard, never used. The body, in cinema, was incomplete. Let's pause here. Why such secrecy? Some of it stems from religion, from the idea that the body is sacred, but also suspicious, that to focus on flesh is to stray from the soul, that our needs must be controlled, not indulged. Add to that the rise of bourgeois manners, the idea that refinement meant pretending to float above the messy realities of digestion, defecation, menstruation, aging, and finally, marketing. In the 20th century, advertisers leaned into shame, especially for women. Commercials warned of not-so-fresh feelings, hinted at odor problems, and sold endless products designed to mask, hide, suppress the body's normal functions. Deodorants, sprays, wipes, perfumes, charcoal-infused pads, scented toilet paper, flushable everything designed not just to clean, but to conceal. The goal? Never let anyone know that you are, in fact, human. And yet, we are. Every single one of us. Even royalty. There's a rumor unconfirmed, but persistent that Queen Elizabeth I once spent so long in conference she had a toilet hidden in her throne, a discreet chamber pot built right into the seat. Her staff reportedly called it the close stool. And you know what? She wouldn't be the first ruler with a disguised latrine. Napoleon had one on his campaign chair. French aristocrats once carried portable bidets in their carriages because stopping on the road was simply too vulgar. But even with all that infrastructure, the shame remained. So much so that toilet anxiety has become a recognized medical condition. Parcopresis, fear of defecating in public. Paroesis, Schuh-Blätter syndrome. Lavatory phobia, general dread of public restrooms. People plan entire days around avoiding toilets. They skip water, they skip meals, they hold it. For hours, for flights, for dates, for meetings, all to avoid the embarrassment of being seen walking into a stall. And let's be clear, this isn't because the act is shameful. It's because we made it so. Because generations of culture, religion, architecture, media, and language have taught us, don't speak of that. Don't ask. Don't let anyone know. But what if we did? What if we unlearned the script? What if children were told, yes, your body works, that's a miracle? What if restrooms weren't tucked away, poorly lit, understocked spaces of shame but clean, welcoming, affirming spaces? What if we didn't giggle at the word poop? What if novels let characters take breaks? What if we laughed, sometimes, at how delightfully ridiculous it all is? Because we're animals that build plumbing. We're philosophers who need fibre. We're dreamers with bladders. And that's okay. So tonight, as you drift off, let the shame melt. Let the silence go. Let the history wash over you, not with embarrassment, but with a kind of quiet triumph. Because even in a world that teaches you to hide, you're allowed to be whole, even the parts that flush. Let's begin with a question you've probably never asked out loud. What did people use before toilet paper? The short answer? Anything. The long answer? Well, let's take a stroll through the centuries, one wipe at a time. Ancient Rome. We start, once again, with our ever-hygienic friends, the Romans. In their public latrines, stone benches with holes over drainage channels, Romans used a tool called a tessorium. It was a sponge, on a stick, kept in a bucket of salt, water, or vinegar between uses. Yes, shared. One writer compared it to cleaning with a sea cucumber tied to a ladle. Others just called it deeply unfortunate. Still, the Romans were practical. The sponge could be rinsed. It was absorbent. And crucially, it didn't chafe. But let's be honest, it was communal. And in hot Mediterranean summers, well, let's not dwell. Ancient Greece. The Greeks had a different solution. Pessoir, small, smooth ceramic discs. Yes, people wiped with pottery. Sometimes old roof tiles. Sometimes repurposed broken plates. Ideally rounded. Less ideally sharp. Scholars have actually found ancient potsherds inscribed with enemies' names. Imagine, Aristophanes is a scoundrel. Then scrub, scrub, scrub. Passive-aggressive hygiene. Very on brand. China, Tang Dynasty, China Anamrata CE. Paper was invented in China. And by the 6th century, there are references to using waste paper official documents, rejected poems, failed calligraphy to wipe. One scholar allegedly said, "I dare not use paper with Confucius' name upon it," an early form of literary respect, and perhaps poor planning. By the Ming Dynasty, 14th century, emperors had large sheets of soft paper made specifically for bathroom use. Measured 2 feet wide, perfumade, the imperial bottom was never chafed. Japan, Heian period. The Japanese used kawakushi, thin wooden sticks. Yes, you heard that right. Sticks. They were carved, smoothed, and carefully shaped. Stored next to the privy, reusable. This method was so widespread, they were sometimes called chugi, or anal sticks. Silent, efficient, slightly terrifying. Medieval Europe. Here, wiping materials were strictly class-based. Nobility, wool rags, lace scraps, fine linen. Peasants, moss, hay, handfuls of straw. Monks, pages from heretical texts. Seriously. In coastal regions, people used seashells. Elsewhere, corn cobs, especially in rural America, well into the 19th century. Yes, dried corn cobs. The original multi-surface scrubber, biodegradable, economical, not endorsed by dermatologists. Islamic world. Here, the method of choice still common today was water. Using the left hand and a small jug or lota, followers would cleanse thoroughly. This practice, known as istinja, was considered not just hygienic, but virtuous. Water, after all, leaves no residue. And unlike sticks, it doesn't splinter. India. Similar to the Islamic approach, water and the left hand were standard. But in rural areas, certain leaves like neem or peepal were also used. Why? Broad, soft, antibacterial. Some even considered the shape of the leaf part of its spiritual purity. The Arctic, up north, where vegetation was scarce and snow plentiful, indigenous peoples used snowballs, yes, smooth stones, animal fur, frozen moss. Imagine sitting on ice, then wiping with more ice. Nature's coldest cleanse. Indigenous Australia. In many Aboriginal cultures, leaves and bark were chosen carefully based on region and season. Women often taught their daughters which plants caused rashes, and which left you feeling fresh as the morning wind. France, 1702. One courtier wrote of using lace trimmings after banquets. Another preferred soft pages from stolen novels. Luxury, it seems, was a matter of both texture and narrative choice. America, 1802. Rural folk used catalogue pages. Sears, Roebuck and Company became the most popular bathroom reading, not for the stories, but the wipeability. People hung the catalogue by a string on the outhouse wall. The pages were thin, the ink non-toxic. The price? Free. Talk about dual-purpose publishing. Toilet paper arrives, 1857. Enter Joseph Gaiety, an American entrepreneur who marketed the first commercially sold toilet paper. It was sold in flat sheets, labeled medicated with aloe. He called it Gaiety's medical paper and claimed it prevented hemorrhoids. At 500 sheets per pack, it was expensive. Most people stuck with catalogues, rags, or corn cobs. But the roll would come. In 1890, the Scott Paper Company introduced the first toilet paper on a roll. The rest, as they say, is history. Tearable, reliable, and eventually two-ply. And yet, even today, wiping habits vary wildly. Over 4 billion people worldwide still prefer water. Bidets are standard in many countries. Paper-only methods are considered crude. In Japan, high-tech toilets not only clean you, they dry, massage, play music, and sometimes offer compliments. In parts of the world, handheld spray nozzles are common. Elsewhere, wipes have become the latest obsession. Flushable? Not always, but undeniably plush. And then there are the toilet paper wars. Over or under, fold or crumple, soft or strong, quilted or smooth. People have opinions. Fierce, passionate opinions. Some households have almost come to blows, all over what, at its core, is the most intimate daily ritual we never talk about. So tonight, as you finish this part and drift off, take a quiet moment to appreciate whatever method you use, be it tissue, water, leaf, or warm jet stream. May it be gentle, may it be thorough, and may you never, ever run out at the wrong moment. Let's start somewhere truly inconvenient. Space. Up there, 400 kilometers above Earth, orbiting at 17,500 miles per hour, astronauts still have to go. And going is not easy. The space toilet. NASA spent years and millions of dollars developing a toilet that works in zero gravity. Because without gravity, everything floats. Solids, liquids, the consequences. So they invented a system of vacuum suction, thigh straps, and airflow, basically a high-tech shop vac with a seat. There's a special camera to help you align correctly, and things become very, very awkward. Urinating requires a funnel. Defecating requires aim. Both require training. One astronaut joked, "It's like docking with the ISS, but more personal. The waste is vacuum sealed, stored in canisters, and occasionally burned off in Earth's atmosphere." Yes, that streak of light you saw might have been stardust. Or someone's Tuesday. The International Space Station, ISS, has 2 toilets. One Russian, one American. They're not interchangeable. In 2008, a pump broke. The Russians had to share. Lines formed. Imagine the tension. 8 scientists, 1 shared suction hole, 0 gravity. But space isn't the only place where bathroom access is complicated. Let's talk about prisons. Toilets behind bars. In many US prisons, toilets are stainless steel, combined with the sink, bolted to the floor, always in view. There are no doors, no stalls, just a toilet, in the open, in front of your cellmate, your bunk, and sometimes the guard. Why? Security. You can't hide contraband in a toilet you can't conceal, but the result is profound. Privacy is erased. Your most basic need becomes a spectacle. Inmates often hold it, wake at odd hours, time their bowel movements for shift changes. And in solitary confinement, you may not have a toilet at all, just a bucket, or nothing, for hours. Human rights groups have called this dignity deprivation, because even among the incarcerated, the need to go with privacy remains universal. In refugee camps, toilets become a matter of safety. Women often walk long distances at night, risking assault just to relieve themselves. Some carry whistles, others go in groups, some simply don't eat or drink after dusk. In many regions, latrines are unlit, unsecured, and unspoken. In cities, the problem flips. Public restrooms are vanishing, privatized, locked, repurposed. In New York City, there are more Starbucks than public toilets. In San Francisco, some neighborhoods have zero access. In many places, people relieve themselves behind buildings, in parks, or not at all. Lack of access becomes a form of exclusion. If you're pregnant, elderly, disabled, or just have a small bladder, your world shrinks. Where can you go if there's nowhere to go? Then there's the fear. Toilet anxiety. It's real. It has names. Germophobia. Fear of contamination. Latrine trauma, PTSD from childhood accidents. Stall hesitation, waiting until no one's around. Some people will wait hours, cross their legs, clench their day, all because the door gap is too wide, or the soap is out, or the flush is automatic and unpredictable. Some bring wipes, others flush with their foot. Some hover, some line the seat with 6 layers of paper like building a nest. And let's not forget the eternal panic. Is it clogged? Is it loud? Can they hear me? One survey found that 48% of office workers refuse to use workplace bathrooms for anything other than urinating. A different study showed 1 in 4 people have delayed bowel movements for an entire flight. Toilets, it seems, are no longer just a utility. They're a psychological battleground. And yet, the need never leaves. Whether you're on a rocket, in a cell, or holding your breath in a Target bathroom with no lock, eventually, nature wins. So maybe the real question isn't how high-tech our toilets are, or how secure, but rather, what kind of society do we build when relief becomes restricted, where bathroom breaks are policed, where needing to go is embarrassing, where simply finding a toilet becomes a daily mission? We used to poop in the woods. Now we need a key, a code, or a purchase receipt. Progress? Maybe. But sometimes, at 2 a.m. in a closed gas station parking lot, you might miss the days of a tree, some leaves, and the freedom to just be. So tonight, as you wind down, take a quiet moment for gratitude, for doors that close, for toilets that flush, and for the gentle mercy of knowing you don't have to wait. Let's set the scene. You're alone, middle of the night. In a public restroom, a dim light flickers. One stall door is mysteriously ajar, and from the far end, you hear a flush. But no one else is there. Congratulations. You've just entered the world of toilet superstitions. Let's go back way back. In ancient Rome, toilets were public, open, and often packed. But they weren't just places for gossip and hygiene, they were considered dangerous. Romans believed in spirits of the latrine called lemures or lares. Why? Because toilets were dark, underground, moist, full of smells, echoes, and shadowy corners, perfect conditions for ghosts. To ward them off, people would carve protective symbols into the walls. Some even whispered chants before sitting down small invocations to keep the bad things in the pipe. And the danger wasn't just spiritual. Toilets were sometimes connected by long, shared sewage tunnels, which meant that occasionally, yes, occasionally rats, snakes, or even fire would erupt from below. Nothing ruins a bathroom break like a flame-spitting weasel. Fast forward to medieval Europe. Latrines were perched on castle walls, suspended over moats or ditches. At night, servants would empty chamber pots into the streets, sometimes calling out, "Garde l'eau," from the French, "Regardez l'eau asterisk," watch the water. Fail to heed the warning, and you might find yourself baptized in last night's ale and stew. But there was another fear, evil spirits entering through the privy hole. That's right, people believed demons could climb into you through your unguarded parts. The solution? Some wore charms, others muttered prayers, a few even crossed themselves before wiping. You never knew what lurked in the plumbing. In Japan, the bathroom is a realm of duality. On one hand, it's considered unclean, on the other deeply sacred. So of course there are ghosts. Meet Hanako-san. She's the spirit of a young girl said to haunt school toilets. If you knock 3 times on the 3rd stall and ask, "Hanako-san, are you there?" you might hear, "Yes, I am," at which point it's too late. She drags you into the toilet. Children across Japan still dare each other to try it. It's like Bloody Mary but with plumbing. Then there's Akaname, the filth licker, a Japanese yokai with a giant tongue that feeds on bathroom grime. He doesn't hurt you, but if your toilet's dirty, he comes. Moral of the story? Clean your bathroom. Even modern restrooms aren't free from myth. Let's talk about the 2-ply conspiracy. Yes, it's real. Some people believe that the switch from single-ply to 2-ply was a capitalist ploy, a government surveillance trick, or a distraction from climate policy. Here's how the theory goes. Single-ply paper is efficient, minimal, sustainable. 2-ply, wasteful, expensive, loud, but it feels fancier, so people pay more. Worse, some claim that ultra-soft TP actually clogs pipes more frequently, leading to more plumber visits, more repairs, more control. One online forum claimed, "The elite never use 2-ply. They use linen and bidets. We're being tricked 1 square at a time." Do we believe them? Not really. Is it kind of fun to wonder? Absolutely. Then there's the ghost flush. You're home alone. Everything's quiet. Suddenly the toilet flushes. No one's near it. Theories include faulty flappers, pressure changes, and of course, vengeful spirits who died waiting for someone to change the role. Some cultures actually ban talking in the bathroom, because words they believe attract attention from the spirit world. Others cover mirrors in bathrooms during storms. Why? Because mirrors are portals, and lightning is an invitation. Let's get weirder. In Victorian England, it was believed that pregnant women shouldn't look into the toilet bowl. Why? Because the baby might be born cursed. In parts of rural Eastern Europe, flushing at night was believed to wake the dead. So if you had to go, you held it, or used a bowl, or apologized quietly to your ancestors before releasing. Even celebrities aren't immune to the paranoia. There's a rumor that Howard Hughes, the reclusive billionaire, had a toilet designed with 4 filters, UV sterilizer, and an audible click that let him know the germs had been terminated. Was it real? Maybe. But it proves something important. No matter how rich, how smart, how famous. Everyone has toilet anxiety. Even today, with our bidets and Bluetooth speakers and auto-lifting lids, people still believe things like, don't flush during a thunderstorm, never say goodbye in a bathroom, if the door creaks open by itself, leave. Because in the end, the bathroom isn't just a room. It's a threshold between privacy and exposure, clean and unclean, daily life and the mysterious unknown, a place where we're completely human and thus, perhaps, a little bit vulnerable. So next time you step into a stall, glance at the mirror, and hear a suspicious drip, just remember, it's probably the pipes. Probably. Sleep tight. Let's start with a confession. Sometimes, we don't go to the bathroom because we need to go. We go to be alone, to escape, to breathe, to check our phone, to cry. And that makes perfect sense, because for all the plumbing and porcelain, the toilet has become one of the last private sanctuaries in public life. Think about it. You're at a wedding, the speeches drag on, the music is loud, your aunt won't stop talking about her bunions. So what do? You slip away to the bathroom, and for 5 glorious minutes you sit, not even using it really, just being. No expectations, no conversation, no audience. A moment of silence in a noisy world. But the bathroom has always been more than a convenience. It's been a stage, a battleground, even a lover's hideaway. Let's begin with romance. Secret meetings and hidden affairs. In the days of chaperones and curfews, young lovers had few places to meet. So where did they go? Outhouses, brivistals, back alley toilets. One medieval poem from France refers to a young couple whispering among the hay behind the House of Smells. Romantic. In 18th century England, some brothels had rooms styled to look like privies. Why? Because no one asked questions about who was going in or why. Even in modern clubs, the bathroom has become a place of flirtation. Lines at the sink turn into mini conversations. Mirrors become confessionals. One woman once wrote, "Every real friendship I've ever made started in a bar bathroom." Another replied, "Same, tears, lipstick, solidarity, protests and politics." Toilets have also been radical spaces. In apartheid-era South Africa, public toilets were segregated. Signs read, "Whites only, non-Europeans." To use the wrong one was an act of defiance. In the US, during the civil rights movement, activists staged sit-ins not just at lunch counters but in segregated restrooms. Bathrooms became battle lines, and they still are. Today, debates over gender-neutral toilets continue across the world. Some see them as dangerous, others as essential. But behind the shouting is something simple. Everyone deserves to go in peace. No fear, no shame, no stares, just relief. Bathrooms as refuge. Beyond politics, the toilet is often a place of personal escape. Students flee bullies. Workers hide from bosses. Parents take a breath away from screaming toddlers. One teacher said, "Sometimes I go into the staff bathroom, lock the door, and just exhale." A single stall becomes a fortress. Tile walls, locked door, a pause. Art and creativity. Some of the best ideas, they're born on the toilet. Really. Scientists, writers, artists, many have confessed that the best insights come mid-wipe. Why? Because the brain relaxes. There's no audience, no performance, just a man, a seat, and a synapse. Martin Luther is said to have come up with his 95 Theses while, you guessed it. Modern poets joke that every anthology should include a section titled Bathroom Thoughts. And don't forget graffiti. Toilet walls have birthed. Political slogans, anonymous poems, phone numbers, questionable drawings of questionable anatomy. Socrates had Plato. Bathrooms have stall wisdom. This too shall pass. Flush your problems away. For a good time, don't call, just nap. Camaraderie in the line. In some settings, especially women's restrooms, the bathroom is a social hub. Compliments fly. Hair is fixed. Secrets are spilled. Strangers become allies. There's something about shared vulnerability, mirror lighting, toilet paper shortages, malfunctioning locks that brings people together. A kind of sisterhood. Or just temporary community. Toilet humor and shame. And yes, we laugh. Toilet humor is as old as language. Ancient Egyptian scribes wrote fart jokes. Greek plays featured bathroom scenes. Shakespeare used puns about, well, you know. Why? Because it's universal. Because it's uncomfortable. Because laughing at what we fear is human. But the shame still lingers. Especially for women. Society whispers, don't admit to needing to go. Or worse, don't let them hear you. So women flush preemptively, spray perfume, pretend. Men too face pressure. Don't take too long. Don't sit unless it's serious. Even children learn quickly that bodies are inconvenient. That sounds are shameful. That smells should be erased. And yet, the toilet persists. A human equalizer. Kings, beggars, CEOs, interns. In the end, we all sit. Same posture. Same vulnerability. Same awkward fumble for toilet paper. It's a place that humbles us. That reminds us we're alive. And that sometimes we just need a break. So tonight, if you're listening from your bed, eyes heavy, maybe needing to get up and go but too cozy to move, know this. The bathroom will be there. Silent. Waiting. Not judging, just receiving. Because that's what it does. It listens. It holds space. And it gives you time to be whoever you need to be for just a moment alone and utterly yourself. Let's begin with something simple. You relieve yourself, then you wash your hands. That's hygiene. But in many cultures, it's also spiritual practice. Because for thousands of years, humans haven't just seen elimination as physical necessity, they've seen it as something that touches the soul. Let's start in the Islamic world. In Islam, cleanliness is not just encouraged, it's required. Before prayer, Muslims perform wudu ritual ablution, before reading the Quran, before entering a mosque, before touching the sacred, and after relieving oneself. There are rules. Use the left hand, cleanse with water, istinja, say a specific dua, supplication, before entering and after leaving the bathroom. The Prophet Muhammad taught that even the act of entering a latrine should be done with care, stepping in with the left foot, asking for protection from unseen evils, and exiting with gratitude. Because the bathroom is not just a room, it's a threshold. In Judaism, there's the blessing called Asher Yatzar. Said after using the toilet, it translates to, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, who created within us openings and cavities. If one of them were to rupture or be blocked, we could not survive." It's a prayer of gratitude for functioning kidneys, for working bowels, for the simple miracle of release. Imagine that, a religion that thanks God for your sphincter, and means it. In Hinduism, the concept of purity and impurity, shuddhi and ashuddhi, is central. Bodily waste is considered polluting. After relieving themselves, devout Hindus bathe, change clothes, avoid touching sacred objects until cleansed. It's not shame, it's respect. The body has rhythms, and to be pure means to move with them, not pretend they don't exist. Let's visit Buddhist Japan. In Zen monasteries, going to the toilet is meditative. No, really. There's a chant for entering the toilet. I go to the toilet with mindfulness. I vow to eliminate greed, anger, and delusion. There's even a manual, The Toilet Etiquette of the Monastic Life. Asterisk. It instructs monks to approach the toilet with awareness, Use minimal paper. Clean the seat afterward. Flush with gentleness. Even the flush is a gesture. Why? Because everything is practice. Even this. In ancient Egypt, priests followed strict hygiene codes. They shaved their bodies, bathed multiple times a day, and before entering temples, they purified themselves, especially after relieving themselves. Clean body, clean spirit. To approach the gods in filth? Unthinkable. Even in Christian monasticism, the toilet was taken seriously. Benedictine rules forbade monks from speaking while relieving themselves. Why? Because the act required humility, a moment of honesty before God. You entered clean in soul, unclean in body, and left the other way around. One 12th century monk wrote, "In the stillness of the cloister latrine, I hear the whisper of sin leaving me." Slightly dramatic, but putic. In Shinto, the Japanese indigenous religion, bathrooms are cared for to honor the spirit of cleanliness, the kami. Some even place small altars in the restroom, offerings of flowers, bowls of salt, to appease the unseen, because purity is power, and dirtiness, not just physical but spiritual. But there's something deeper, a shared thread across cultures. The toilet is a place of release, not just waste, but anxiety, guilt, tension. You walk in burdened. You walk out a little lighter, and so over time, the act became sacred, because it reminded us that no matter how powerful, proud, or pious, we are all animals, all temporary, all beholden to biology. And yet, somehow, that vulnerability became beauty. Imagine this. A 14th century mystic finishes praying. He walks to the edge of the forest, kneels beside a tree, relieves himself. Then, he prays again, not in shame, but in gratitude, because the ability to let go, to be cleansed, to start anew that is holy. So tonight, as you lie still, maybe your stomach gurgles, maybe you think of something that needs to be let go, know that this too is part of being human, part of being sacred, and that, in the quiet rustle of paper, the soft sound of water, the gentle closing of a door, there is grace, even in the flush. And so here we are, from Roman sponges to space vacuums, from whispered prayers in medieval monasteries to neon-lit stalls in 24-hour gas stations. We've wandered through outhouses, castles, temples, alleyways, and zero-gravity toilets, and somewhere along the way, we discovered that the act of letting go is not just natural, it's profoundly human. Behind every door, behind every flush, is a reminder. We are soft machines, leaky, rhythmic, occasionally inconvenient, but also thoughtful, resourceful, and deeply funny, because who else but humans would turn a bucket into a throne, a necessity into ritual, a private act into public policy? Tonight, maybe your body feels a little heavier, or your mind a little lighter. Maybe you're thinking of the last time you sat in silence, not scrolling, not hurrying, just breathing on cold porcelain. Or maybe you're just relieved that you're in bed, not medieval France, and your bathroom has both plumbing and privacy. Wherever you are, I hope this journey offered you more than just facts. Maybe a chuckle, maybe a sigh, maybe even a strange sense of peace knowing that all of us across time, culture, and kingdom share this one humbling, oddly sacred routine. So thank you for staying with me, for listening, for laughing, for letting the world pause with you for a while. If you enjoyed this strange, sleepy walk through history, feel free to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe leave a comment telling me what time it is where you are. Until next time, dear listener, flush gently, sleep deeply, and remember, even the weirdest parts of being human are worth telling stories about.